Initially, there was just this big explosion, and then the sea was covered in oil and debris and sailors, and it was really a pathetic sight. I joined the RAF in 1940. I was 17. I put the age onto 18. Anyway, I had an interview and I had a medical, and they said, OK, we'll have you. And then they said, where's your birth certificate? I said, you didn't ask. And they said, you'll have to send it. I never did, and they never asked. It meant that my age was a year on, and in fact it stayed with me right up until the Ministry of Pensions wanted to pay me my pension. They said I was 65. I had to admit I was only 64. I had training on all various aircraft, and I ended up on the Sunderlands. The Sunderland is a big flying boat with a crew of 12 and 8 depth charges we could drop on a U-boat. The Germans' U-boats had bases on the French coast, and their aim was to find convoys and pick off ships and sink them, which they were very successful in doing. That was their job, was to stop the Allies getting supplies from America. If they were under the water, they were probably 5 or 6 knots, but on the surface they could do 12, they could do twice as much, so that they wanted to stay on the surface so they could quickly get into the Atlantic. Coastal Command's job was to stop U-boats attacking ships. Even if we didn't sink U-boats, if we kept them below the surface, we were being successful, because that would shorten their range. When we were flying over the Atlantic, our first task was to find the convoy that we had been set to cover. That probably took about 6 hours, something like that. When we found the convoy, our job was to fly round the convoy to make sure that U-boats didn't surface and attack the convoy. Hopefully, we would see a U-boat on the surface and get down quickly before it could submerge. We would get down to 50 feet and drop depth charges on it. There was nothing much other than looking at the sea, looking at the convoys, looking at the sky. That was about it. It was a rather boring thing because I said, other than flying round the convoy, there was nothing to do. We wanted to see U-boats and attack them. Wanted action. I was definitely excited about having action, but I was also apprehensive. life then was a matter of hoping that the weather would be 10 tenths cloud at 1,000 feet, because then we were low enough that we could get down to attack a U-boat, and we were high enough that we could get into cloud if we saw Ju-88s. We had lots of guns, which in theory we could use to defend ourselves against Ju-88s. In fact, the Germans knew us as the flying porcupines. But our only real chance, if 6 Ju-88s found us, was to get into cloud. So if the weather forecast was a fine day with a blue sky, that was bad news. I don't know the total Coastal Command losses, but they were much higher than you might think. On our squadron, whilst I was there, we lost 12 Sunderlands. So that was, that was 150 people. It was difficult, particularly if you got the job of going to their quarters and going through their belongings so they could be sent to their relatives. That was difficult. You don't know exactly what happened to them, but you are pretty sure they've been shot down by Ju-88s. The first time we saw U-boats on the surface, there were 5 of them in a group, because that's one of the things they like to do. And one of the U-boats got separated from the pack, and we were able to get down really quick, and we dropped a stick of 8 depth charges, 4 on the starboard and 4 on the stern, and that was a really good drop. Initially, there was just this big explosion, and then the sea was covered in oil and debris and sailors, and it was really a pathetic sight, seeing these sailors clinging on to bits of boat, etc. And you began to realise that there are people down there. And it was so sort of pathetic that we took a vote and said, shall we drop them a dinghy? It was agreed we should. And we dropped them a dinghy, and 7 of them got onto it, including the skipper. And they were later picked up by a Navy cruiser of some sort. We were quite pleased with ourselves, but we were reprimanded for dropping the dinghy because they said you jeopardised your own safety by reducing the number of dinghies that you've got on board. I think the initial thing was that we had successfully sunk a U-boat. Feeling of satisfaction. At last we had sunk a U-boat, after thinking of, say, the Atlantic hour upon hour seeing nothing. Hooray, at last we've seen a U-boat and sunk it. It was only after a bit of looking at what was happening that one began to feel, oh God, there's all these people drowning. What changed was, just for a short while anyway, I looked upon the U-boat as a complete thing with people. We dropped the dinghy because we felt sorry for these people drowning. And it was a sort of combined feeling amongst the crew, which was a bit, when I look back at it, it was rather surprising. And that the captain said, okay, we'll take a vote. And everyone, as far as I know, said, yeah, okay, drop the dinghy.